Hello and welcome. With the front lines being more or less stable for the moment, we'll focus on one breaking news when it comes to the political sphere, and then mostly on the mobilization and the political developments, both in regards to the infighting within Russia, as well as to what is happening in Ukraine, in the occupied regions of Ukraine. We are going to talk about this in this episode. The breaking news that I received right before I finished the preparation of the video is that Russia is suspending its its participation in the agreement to export grain because of attacks on ships in Sevastopol. I have no further information than this. As said, this video is being recorded at 11:50 Panama time on Saturday, the 29th of October. So there might be more information at a later point, but at this very moment, I don't have any additional information. Another thing generally is what Kadyrov has published a video. Ramzan Kadyrov, the head of the Chechen local government, and he said there that in the attack that was talked about in this on this channel as well, there have been 23 dead Chechen soldiers and 58 were wounded. It is important to talk about this in this regard for once, because with him talking about 23 while Ukraine has claimed 30 shows that his claim of 23 is likely true. It's close enough to the original claim that it seems unlikely that he would deny the fact that it was 25 or 27 dead when he's already admitting 23. We can see here, though, how Ukraine's claims are being created. What we see here is that it was obviously not pure fantasy what Ukraine did. Yeah, claiming that 30 soldiers, 30 Kadyrovцы were killed, but they actually claimed 30% too many, with claiming 30 dead instead of the 23. And this is an indication why we should always be really hesitant when it comes to numbers by the Russians. That's why I don't take any numbers I get from the Ukrainians or from the Russians for that matter for granted. I just wait completely for image proof, even though obviously we have to be aware that images will not show the full picture, but they are at least something that is proven other than the claims, and it means we're not relying on claims by either government. When we come to the eastern frontier, we have Ukrainian attacks reported in the direction of Mykolaiivka and Orlyanka. They are here. So this is more or less directly east of Kupiansk. It seems that they haven't gone too far with those attacks. They haven't reached too much. The Russians claim they defeated an attack on Berestove. So in this regard, this would mean Berestove is still in Russian hand, even though the map here, which is pro-Ukrainian, shows it as being contested. The Russians are also saying there was an attack on Chervonopopivka, which is it here? Again, here probably it's meant likely in the direction of Chervonopopivka, so that the Ukrainians have actually reached the road. I don't see any proof of that yet. And the Russians are also saying they attacked Kuzemivka, which is where is it? I forgot about it. I don't find it anymore. Kuzemivka, wasn't it somewhere down here? I can't really say. Unfortunately, I don't find it right now. And before I waste time searching for it, we'd rather continue. One interesting thing is we have a video again of TOS-1 missile systems here, the thermobaric warheads they are firing. And this video is from the, let me see. This video is from the area between Kremina and Svatove, so they are here in use. They are here in use against the Ukrainians. Other than that, we have a message from Telegram of a pro-Russian commentator who is explaining huge problems in that area. He says he had time spending with them, and he says a lot of the radio communication on the Ukrainian side is either from languages from the Caucasus, so probably Georgians and Chechens that are fighting on Ukrainian side, as well as foreign that would likely be English being on the other side. That is one thing, but he's talking about the issues. The morale has had a massive impact from the defeat in Izium, and there are cases of non-compliance with combat orders. And here he talks, he witnessed personally a general trying to convince a company to go back to the front line for 1 hour. He believes that, he says that the mobilized persons are not trusted, so they are mostly in the second and third line of the defense, which would mean the first line are the combat proven, but they still have to bear the full brunt of the Ukrainian attacks. And in the end, he's saying, he's also saying that in the region, there are different units from 2 different military districts, so they don't have worked together before, which will cause additional problems. And that in the end he sees a huge problem for that whole front in the future. I said this video here, you can see it. It's this text. It's translated in English. You will find it in a few hours on the website that is linked in the description, and you have the chance of just pausing the video to read it in case you want to read it for yourself. Ukrainians say they defeated an attack on Bilohorivka, and south of that we have the usual amount of attacks. I have not read about an attack on Spirne this time, but apart from that, Bakhmutske, Ivangrad, Optune, in the direction of Zaitseve, etc. Down here, down to Avdiivka, where there have been further attacks, and down to Marinka. Along the whole front line, we have the usual attacks. I don't have any specific proven claims of conquest, but what is visible is that Ivangrad and Optune, which supposedly were both mostly captured or fully captured according to the Russians, they are still being fought over. So what we can see is the Russians claiming a little too much more towns and cities of control, which they actually do, which might be an indication that this is meant to support Prigozhin's claim that he's the only side that is still advancing his troops, his Wagner PMC is the only one still making any gains. On the southern front, we have the usual mix: artillery fire, rocket artillery, and air attacks and attacks with Shahid 136. Obviously, the Ukrainian side is hitting back too. There was a report of a fuel train being destroyed in Donetsk, a Russian fuel train likely destroyed with HIMARS in the oblast of Donetsk, but mostly Russian keep firing in that area in the direction of Dnipro, Zaporizhzhia, Nikopol, etc., and many other towns. Attacks are going on here, but no ground fighting that is big enough to be specifically reported, and especially no ground fighting that has made the frontline change in any way. In Kherson, we have the usual report about attacks, lines of communication, logistics, ferries, pontoon bridges, troop concentration, command centers, etc. Other than that, Ukraine is now saying they observe further reinforcements, both in troops. Freshly mobilized soldiers are still arriving in their thousands, actually, and they are observing fortification work that shows that the Russian, other than initial claims, don't seem to be planning to run away too soon yet. Ukraine is specifically saying about preparations in Kherson for house-to-house fighting. We are talking about reinforcing walls here, sandbags, etc., things like this that are being done to allow defenders to easily and more safely conduct combat within Kherson. But they are also fortifying the other side of the river. So in this regard, the Russians are preparing this time in case of a Ukrainian breakthrough that they have fallback positions on the other side of the river. When it comes to the front line, I only have 2 specific informations. There is a Russian military blogger was saying that the Ukrainians are currently creating a troop concentration in Davydiv-Brit, which is here, which would likely then aim downwards towards Berislav. And the other side is the Russians are reporting an attack in the northwest of Kherson city, so probably somewhere in this region, but I don't even have a specific town to tell you. That's it from the front line already. As said, the front is more or less stable for the moment. We have more and more indications that the Russians now intend to definitely defend Kherson. They are reinforcing it with fresh personnel, while there have been some image proof of them withdrawing units. That might have been troop rotation, or there was more likely units that can't be expended or that are threatened inside of the bridgehead, where they might have been pulled back with their equipment, something like this. But support units, I would think of potentially electronic warfare units or something like this, where you decide to better get their equipment and the troops to safety, and also at the same time limit the amount of supplies that have to be brought in, as obviously every air defense unit that is on this side of the river has to be supplied over the river, whereas if it's stationed just on this side, that's not of an issue. Other than that, in the south, it's still quiet, and I have not read about recent claims by the Russians that the Ukrainians plan to attack. We have the usual attacks here that go on for months without achieving really much. Mostly it's pointing now that it's meant at bolstering Prigozhin's position within the power struggle within Russia, and we have still reports of Ukrainian attacks along the front line here. Now and then they seem to advance a little. Sometimes we have proven advances, so the Ukrainians still have the initiative, but it has definitely slowed down, and part of that will have been due to the mobilization, and that's the right point to switch over to the mobilization now. Putin and Shoigu had a public event, we're talking I think on television, where they said they announced the end of the mobilization. From now on, there will only be volunteers and regular kontraktniki, so contract soldiers will be recruited. They said 300,000 men were recruited. Of those, 82 are already in Ukraine, and 218,000 are still being trained within Russia. Out of the 82,000 in Ukraine, 41,000, so exactly 50% are in combat units. And of the 300,000 in total, they said that 50%, so 150,000, will be sent to the front line to combat units, whereas 150,000 will be in support units. Putin admitted there were logistics and supply issues, but says they were only there initially and now they are being resolved. And Russia has to learn the necessary lessons to improve the system of registration and calling up reserves in the future. Russia is likely going to make room for the conscripts that are being called up on November the 1st. That had the initial cycle was meant for October the 1st, but it was postponed for 1 month because of the mobilization. And of now, the 300,000 are officially recruited, but 700,000 have fled. Over 700,000 men in fighting age have fled Russia up to this date. It's interesting in this regard that Russia, Putin are claiming the 300,000. We have no idea how many it actually is. Opposition figures were talking about 1 million or 1.2 million. We recently talked about some calculation according to open source data and marriages and so on that would indicate more than 500,000 having been recruited. But obviously for us it's impossible to verify the exact number. The interesting part is that they say 50% will be in combat unit and 50% in supply role, which is obviously meant for the domestic audience, that the parents can feel a hope that of 50-50 that their children are in no actual danger. And by giving us numbers that are suspiciously even numbers, I mean 82,000, exactly 150,000, exactly 50% here, exactly 50% there, etc. We obviously know that those numbers cannot be completely true, while they might be close to the reality. The obvious intent from my understanding would be that he explains why units are on the front line, but as there is no transparency, he gives the domestic audience the implication of the actual situation being far easier than it might be in reality, as there is no way for you to find out even if you know that your friend, your husband, your brother is on the front line, you have no way of knowing if he's one of those supposedly just 41,000 that is already in Ukraine on the front line, or if that number is actually much, much bigger. So by giving numbers to the audience, he's giving them something to work with, something to calculate. I have a 50% chance of being not on the front line. It's only 300,000 out of 140 million. So my likelihood of being recruited is this and this low. It seems to me it's mostly aimed at the domestic audience to ease their worries, no matter the reality on the front line there. But that's my interpretation of that whole thing. A Russian military blogger is now reporting that Wagner is looking for new recruits that have experiences in operating the Panzer S1 and the S300 air defense system, and that they are looking for pilots for helicopters and combat planes. We already knew from May that Su-25s were operated by Wagner. There was a prominent case of a former soldier who fell in Ukraine while flying a Su-25 from Wagner. So this is nothing new, but air defense, long-range air defense system. Panzer is short-range, but S-300 is a long-range air defense system. You could probably call it up to strategic air defense system. So those systems being operated by Wagner basically means that Prigozhin is now creating a second army next to the regular Russian army, as they are no longer some special infantry units with some light armored support, but they intend to build it to a full-scale military with at least an army and an air force for itself. This is the mobilization is the good thing to switch over to the political part, because the interesting part here is that he appeared together with Shoigu, showing that he's still supporting Shoigu in the power struggle within Russia, especially when it comes to the Siloviki. But before that, he also had a speech in a separate event where he says the Ukrainian sovereignty will only be possible with a Russian guarantee that Russia was the one who created Ukraine, and it's a historic fact that Russians and Ukrainians are one people, and that it's wrong that they live in different states, in different countries. In the past, a day before, he already said that Ukraine lost its sovereignty and it's now a vassal of NATO. Kadyrov, and when we come back to the power struggle, I said, unfortunately, I mixed that up. I should have said it a little bit later, that Putin appeared together with Shoigu, showing to strengthen his position in the power struggle, because now we have Kadyrov entering the struggle again, and he massively criticized Colonel General Lapin, who is the commander of the Central Military District and responsible for Svatove Kremina, for the axis here we see on the map here. He publicly criticized him again, and at the same time he was praising Prigozhin and Wagner beyond any normal measures. He's saying that Lapin wasn't available for him when he tried to talk to him, and that the Chechen troops have to hold the front line for the Russians, because the Russians have so much for the Russian army, which is not capable of holding the front line, also because of massive desertion. And he said that Lapin is going to lose Svatove to the Ukrainians. We see here the flare up again. Putin now seems to strengthen the military after he has previously stood aside in the power struggle, but Kadyrov has entered the battle for power in Russia again and is pairing up with Prigozhin once more. From the occupied areas, we have the news that Russian occupation authorities are now massively confiscating the cell phones of Ukrainians. According to the martial law, they have the legal right to do that. so the legal justification should probably be the better word to use. They have the justification to use it, and according to what is being reported is they look for, they check the phones whether the Ukrainians, whether the persons that have the phones are following pro-Ukrainian social media. In that case, they will be warned, and if they keep doing it, they would be fined. That's what's coming from the official positions, but it's obviously, it should be obvious that the Russians will also look for connections to partisans, that they will try to identify pro-Ukrainian inhabitants. We should not forget, and this is something later, I'm going to pull this forward again, they intend now to force a Russian passport basically on everyone there. So this way they can more or less identify pro-Ukrainian, in quotation marks, Russians right from the beginning by having their cell phones right now. And in that case, as in later phases, they can use that knowledge for whatever reason. And what can also be assumed with the confiscation of the cell phones is that they want to prevent the spread of informations towards the Ukrainian government. I said it in the past on this channel that the Ukrainians reported like 2 months ago that they received 340,000, I think was the number, of informations from civilians about Russian troop movements, about Russian positions, etc. And by taking away cell phones, it's obviously one way to restrict that flow of information. The Russian head of occupation of Crimea has said that Russia has finished the evacuation from Kherson. The Ukrainian head of the Kherson Oblast, on the other hand, so the legal head of the oblast, was saying that the children that have been deported, or in quotation marks you could call it evacuated, are not allowed to return home, and they can't contact their parents or any relatives, which again would fuel the fear that they might be adopted out and spread out and never return to their parents. At least some military bloggers, oh, I forgot this here. This is where we have about Kherson, the development here. This is the airport. And we can see the positions are increasingly being empty. So something is happening on the airport. All the equipment that was here is now gone. Now, whether that's moved more to the front line or whether some of it was drawn back over the Dnieper, I obviously can't tell, but we can see that the defensive positions of the airport, which is here, so fairly close to the front line, and which was a staging point, they are now being abandoned more or less completely. This here is something, I have a pro-Russian commentator on Telegram again, and this is again like I usually do, this is the Google translation, but he's saying the interesting part here is that it's perfect. They are now actively, like, we've taken out and are now actively integrating the population of Kherson region into Russia. This is not deportation. Apartments and land remain in property, so they are not expropriating the property, which is soon to be occupied, liberated by Ukraine. They are not nationalizing it or something. He claims this is the reason why it's not deportation. But the interesting part is this is a mixing of new Russians with the population of their great motherland. It's easier to return people to historic mentality. So he's basically saying we are thinning out the Ukrainians, we're spreading them among Russia, and as they then are mixed with Russians, then they will assimilate. Again, an indication that of this guy, at least now, not an official one, but again an indication that would confirm the Ukrainian claims that they want to assimilate and basically turn them into Russians. Russia, and now we come back to what I already said about the passports. Russia is now trying to force the passport on all Ukrainians on the 30th of October. Voluntarily hasn't reached to a necessary point, and 30th of October is important because it's not just tomorrow, it's 2 days ahead of the usual conscription cycle, which will mean that men who are no longer allowed for weeks, if not months, to leave the occupied area those men will then be conscripted, or at least according to Russian understanding, are legally able to be conscripted into the Russian armed forces, and thus being used in the Russian military against Ukraine if necessary. I have few tiny little things in the end. We have one video here because sometimes it is talked about. We see an air defense situation, and I'm not completely sure. It's not showing me any sound sources. So I'm not completely sure if you can actually listen to that. Let me quickly check it, because in this case it's actually really important. Audio input source. Second one. Nope. I don't know how to get this working. So I hope you can still hear it. Yes, you should be actually able to hear it. I see it now. So what you can see, what I hope you can see here is, and here is the sound, and what you see here, and that should actually be the German Gepard air defense system likely shooting down drones of Iranian drones now being used in Ukraine. We have one here in case you heard it. I can't say that now. I'm unfortunately not completely sure, but in case that's true, you can listen to it here. You can hear the sound of it shooting in there. You saw it in that short video. And we have another video here of it. Wait, that was with music, so I need to turn it off. Hopefully that worked. And there you can see it here, which seems to indicate Gepard, or which is cheetah in English, being used in ground combat, destroying armored vehicles, or maybe unarmored too. And finally, we'll end it up with probably the most beautiful trench in this war. We see a Ukrainian artist here using his time on the front line to make his position, to do something with the time he has, and make his position more beautiful, as you can see it here. It's carving into wood, I guess, or is it into stone? I'm not completely sure. But as we can see, he's making it quite beautiful. That's it for now from my side. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching at this point. And this channel is only possible because of the support from viewers like you. So if you want to support the channel, you can do so by the means stated in the description. And I want to thank everyone who has already supported the channel a lot, because, as I said, thanks to you, all of this is possible. You can also support the channel by hitting the thumbs up, by leaving a comment, by starting a discussion in the comment section, and obviously by subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell button. And if you want, you can also share the channel, these videos with friends and acquaintances to help me make the channel grow. That's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.